everyone, and welcome. I'm Will Millard. I'm Head of Engagement at the Centre for Education and Youth. Like the weather, this week has been unsettling and at times stormy. Let's cast our minds back to March when schools closed. Exams were effectively cancelled, pulling the rug from beneath school leaders, parents, teachers, and most importantly, young people's feet across the country. Since then, everyone has felt their way forward, with schools and their students showing remarkable grit amidst uncertainty and sometimes distress. Teachers supplied estimated grades and ranked pupils within grades within subjects. Ofqual then standardised these results using, among other things, schools' historical performance data and pupils' prior attainment. In England this week, students received their exam results, and many will rightly be celebrating. Top marks have gone up, and the number of A-levels achieved by single students has marginally increased on last year's figure. However, many are left reeling upon the news that nearly 40% of results were downgraded, over a third by 1 grade and 3% by 2 grades. And for context, only 2% of results were upgraded. Furthermore, there's evidence that the system has disproportionately and negatively affected poorer students. Similar concerns in Scotland led to the Scottish Government's spectacular U-turn last week, deciding to grant students their original estimated grades. And this prompted calls for the English DfE to do the same, perhaps prompting Tuesday's intervention permitting appeal on the basis of mock grades. Universities and parents are also, at this point, figuring out what all this means. In short, this has been a messy and often painful experience for all concerned. However, I have some good news. I can think of no one better to help make sense of what's been going on than our panel, who I'll introduce shortly. Firstly, some brief housekeeping. The session is going to open with the panelists sharing some brief reflections on the current situation. We are recording this session and will be live tweeting from the CfEY account. Following panelists' initial observations, our audience, and welcome to you, will be able to ask questions using the Q&A function. And if you navigate to the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see the Q&A box through which you can submit questions that I will select and put to the panel. Submit your question along with your name and your organisation, because it's great to know, for example, if questions are coming from other school leaders, other teachers, other young people, and I'll pose it to the panel. Equally, if you want to address a specific speaker, please make that clear. You can upvote questions in the Q&A function that you would like asked. So please do that if one stands out that you particularly like to hear the answer to. If the Q&A function isn't working for you for whatever reason, please message my colleague Alex Robertson, who will help. And if you have some more general comments or thoughts, please do write those in the chat box. Finally, a plug for our sister event next week. We're running a very similar event for the GCSE results, so please do sign up for that if you haven't already. Finally, I'm delighted to introduce the panel, and this is in no particular order. Keziah Featherstone is the head teacher at Q3 Academy Tipton. Jill Pooley is deputy head teacher at Sydenham School in South London, and I'm delighted that she's joined by her student Davina, who received her results yesterday, and I'm happy to say is celebrating. Stephen Jones is the warden at St Edward's School, Oxford. Youande Harrowell is an assistant principal, but joins us today as the founder of Mindful Equity UK. And Leora Cruddas is the chief executive of the Confederation of School Trusts. Keziah, I'm going to come to you first. What in 2 to 3 minutes happened at your school yesterday? Tell us about what that experience was like for you and for your students.
Well, it didn't start yesterday. It obviously started on Wednesday, which is download day. So the experiences and the emotions of the staff involved, well, the senior team would have started on Wednesday. And my deputy head, my vice principal that goes in to do the downloading, goes in very early. So her news on her way into work was full of the sort of the triple lock offer from the government that now includes the possibility of including mocks, although we don't know what a valid mock is yet. We've been preparing ourselves for bad news pretty much the entire time. My school serves an area that is characterised by disadvantage. On top of that, we only took over 2 years ago a school that had been in special measures for years and years and years, and that had a very poor reputation. This was going to be our year to make a massive difference, both to GCSEs and to A levels. We were expecting to be downgraded. We were expecting our young people to be affected very poorly. We were expecting lots of disappointments. And I'll be honest, on the morning of the Wednesday when we were first looking at our results, that's how we felt. 2% of our grades at A level had gone up. I'll be honest, we do disagree with the 2% that have gone up. We think that's because they had prior higher attainment at GCSE, but they hadn't necessarily performed at A level as well, partly because they just simply hadn't really worked the way that we had wanted them to, and 25% of our grades had been downgraded. Now, as the day went on, I suppose it turned a little bit to relief, which is an awful thing to say, given that 25% of student grades have been downgraded. But when other schools were reporting much, much higher, we were thinking maybe we haven't been as affected as others. And because of that, there was a sense of relief, which is awful, really. Thursday, we didn't have any students on site to collect their results, partly because of our COVID arrangements. We're a BSF site, it's overly cautious, and we've got some building work going on. So students had their results emailed out, they had them posted out, and then we had an appointment system where they could come into school. We only had 3 students come in yesterday because they were concerned because they hadn't got into their first choice university, and one of those who was meant to be going to Liverpool has been very, very badly treated by the system, and I'm absolutely devastated for her. We are left angry, we're left disappointed, we're left knowing that students still don't know what a valid mock is. We still don't know how we can appeal until next week. We've been told, or my exam secretary has been told, it's going to take 42 days for appeals to come through. So students wishing to go to university and wishing to hold on to see if their appeals are successful to go to universities are not going to be able to start university. So my lingering feeling is disappointment. And I'll be honest, the way it's been handled, the pit in my stomach for next week is even worse.
Okay, thank you, Keziah. I'm sure that raises lots of, vital questions that we will return to shortly. Jill, I'm going to come to you next. How does that sit with you? What Keziah's been saying?
Very, very similar. I echo pretty much everything that Keziah said. I'll say a little bit about our circumstance because that might explain some differences. So we operate as a joint sixth form. We're a girls' school, and Forest Hill Boys' School is part of our sixth form too. And we're a comprehensive, inclusive sixth form, which is quite large for a school. We've got about 250 students in year 13. And I say that because we recognise and we've identified that there's been a real difference in the way that larger cohorts and smaller cohorts, schools and subjects have been affected by that. So I'll talk Wednesday as well, as Keziah did, because you're quite right, Keziah. That was Wednesday is the day that I, the whole year that I feel most anxious about, actually. It ruins my summer holidays every year. But normally, normally for the most part, when you look at the results on Wednesday, you feel fairly confident that students have got the right outcomes, and if they haven't, you are clear about the process to follow with that. So on Wednesday, we identified a range of experiences, really. So we had one subject where results have gone up significantly, resulting in some subjects getting grades that not sure that they would have necessarily got in a real exam. They may have done, but the vast majority of larger subjects were downgraded, and overall it was definitely by it was over 40% of grades were downgraded. In some smaller subjects, more minority subjects with smaller cohort sizes, the results weren't impacted at all. And as the day went on and I was following Twitter, etc., and in the Guardian, recognised that actually that was because smaller cohorts had not been impacted at all. And it's not difficult to think about what types of institutions have smaller class sizes. We don't have small class sizes apart from those minority subjects that we choose to run. It's expensive to run smaller classes when we choose to run a number of them. So there were some subjects where they were particularly hardest to hit. And when you looked at students' outcomes on the Wednesday, you could see some students who had fared, I wouldn't say fared well, they'd fared as well as they deserved. So there were students who got the grades that they deserved, and that was wonderful. But there were other students who, for no fault of their own or their teachers, had not got the grades that they deserved. And there were some students occasionally where they've been downgraded by 2 grades. I suppose one of the things, my first thought is for the students and the families, and one of the conversations that I've had with students over the last 2 days has been to make sure that they recognise that these results are not their results in the sense that they aren't an outcome of their efforts and their output in an exam situation. They are a consequence of an algorithm. I'd like to say something about the process of the CAGs coming up with the centre assessed grades, because the other thing that was really obvious when I looked on Wednesday was that they hadn't been respected in large part. So the centre assessed grade process came out, and I know a number of schools, and I work across 2 schools actually, because I work with colleagues at Forest Hill Boys School, spent a long time working through a really robust process to come up with centre assessed grades, looking at prior data of the students, looking at their progress over time, looking at the progress of the subject. We use ALPS at sixth form to generate our progress figures, and so one of the steps in that process was to re-put the grades that we were identifying into ALPS, just to check that we weren't overinflating our outcomes. And I know that I heard, I think it was on this morning actually, yesterday, Mr. Williamson talking about how teachers would have all entered A's and A stars, which is incredibly disrespectful. There was a really robust system in place at our school, like I know there was everywhere, which involved lots of time, lots of energy, lots of meetings, lots of discussion, lots of really difficult discussions, where teachers, where senior leaders are asking them to justify grades and to identify why they've put the grades in that they have. So that was really, that was a really robust process. And so I can't for the life of me understand why suddenly mock exams, which is a process that varies hugely from school to school, sixth form to sixth form, and were never intended to be outcomes. Mock exams are used for a variety of purposes by schools, and even within schools actually there's variety in terms of, I know that I mark my sociology mock exams with a very high grade boundaries. So the idea that would be the grounds on which we may appeal as against the centre assessed grades, which incorporated a vast, much wider range of data than that, and had been through a much more rigorous process than that. I don't really quite understand. On the day, as Keziah said, we had a remote experience, so we didn't have the usual, celebrations. And I understand that that's to do with COVID-19. There was no way around that. I'm personally quarantining, and we had obviously we were concerned about being responsible for a spike, because as much as students would promise me they wouldn't hug each other, I'm not sure that would have been the case in reality, Davina. So yesterday was different to usual results days, because we had a lot more. We put in place various systems to make sure that we could be in touch with students using Microsoft Forms and phone calls and Teams meetings, etc. There were a lot more students asking about appeals and being really unclear about the appeals process. And it was difficult to respond because, of course, we don't have clarity on the appeals process. We're not quite sure how mocks would be used against the appeal for an appeal. And the original appeals process was very, very limiting indeed, unless you've suddenly become a mixed school from being a single sex school, or your head's changed. It seemed like really unlikely that you'd have grounds to make an appeal.
Jill, I wonder at this point, because we'll come back to appeals.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Obviously,
Yeah.
it's a really,
Yeah.
it's a hot issue. But Davina, I mean, this seems like a great time just to come to you and to ask how your experience of this has been this week. How have you found it?
So I don't know, it's been a bit of an up and down because I kind of went into it expecting the worst because I heard about Scotland and how a lot of their results weren't really reflective of the students, like what the students expected. And so I kind of went, right, whatever happens, there's always clearing. And then I got my results on yesterday morning and I was very happy. I feel like I got the results I can't even speak. I got the results that I deserved. I got into my firm. So me personally, I was very happy, but then hearing about other people, it kind of made it a bit bittersweet because you don't want to be like celebrating, but then there's some people who maybe deserve the same results as you or even higher, but didn't get the results that they deserved. And so, I don't know, it was just a very weird process. Like everything was kind of a bit of a blur. I still didn't really understand how they were like basing the exam results off. I didn't really get anything. I tried to as much as I could, but it was just a very unclear process because nobody really knew anything. Like this was all very sudden in the sense of like cancelling exams and so it was really weird, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm thrilled for you, Davina, that even for you personally, the week has ended on a high, and congratulations.
Well deserved.
Stephen, I'll come to you next. So what's your sense of all of this and of what our previous panelists have been saying?
Well, obviously our setting is very different in that we're an independent school in Oxford, which is principally a boarding school. And the other critical difference here is that we're an IB school as well as an A-level school. And this particular year, we had one of our largest IB cohorts. So we typically we have a year group of 150. Just under 100 of those were IB this year. And I might want to say something about that. And that did mean that we do fall slightly into the small cohort size issue, which has helped us enormously. So compared with a lot of my colleagues in independent schools who probably feel very similarly to Keziah and Jill on this issue, we actually had a very, very quiet day. Apart from the university work, which cracked on as usual yesterday, we didn't have any pupils in. We had a very quiet Zoom session that people could come into. Very few pupils turned up to it. By chance, and I think it is this cohort size thing, seems to be the thing at play with only 50 odd candidates across a number of subjects. I would have thought that even, I think the only subjects that would have been in the big cohort would have been English and maths, and a couple of others perhaps here. We were downgraded against CAGs by 12% of those, but we were upgraded by 4%. And the profile of the outcomes pretty much matched the profile of the school. One of the things that we have a pretty stable year group, year in, year out. So we can see, and we were looking at this, and I very much agree with the comments, particularly Keziah, about the concern leading up to this. One of the things I was going to do straight away was to model this and just check that it actually fitted our cohort model. And so we've got a few people that are a little bit disappointed and a few people that are quite happy and so on and so forth. But overall, for these reasons, we're quite happy. On the contrary, with the IB, which obviously happened back in July, using a slightly different modelling process, but essentially the same, we've been significantly downgraded and we're still fighting that quite hard. Because if one looks at the figures, the school cohort percentages are down significantly on every other previous year of IB. And so we still have the pupils that are being very badly affected for us are IB candidates who have all lost their, a whole bunch of them have lost their university places in the same way, and some very, very good candidates in there too. So I'm slightly in an unusual position from that point of view. Certainly within the independent sector, the HMC press release does have that 4 out of 5 independent heads feel that this year's results are unfair. We don't feel that ourselves because that's our view of it, but I absolutely understand that in that sense. It's probably worth saying in terms of the effect on pupils, and I think the big thing here is, and I think we'd probably all agree with this, is that the pupils have had a really tough time. They've had their final year at school removed from them, and that's not just the parties and the enjoyment, but it's the justification of sitting an exam, and I do think that what's gone awry fundamentally has been with the generosity of the award, both in Scotland, in the IB and in the A level, that inevitably what happens is we always predict, our predictions should always be higher than the actual outcomes, because when people sit exams, a few of them do better, but far worse, the number of people that have a bad day and lose a grade is always greater. So when we predict an A, that's because someone can get an A, and if they have a bad day and they get a B or even a C, gee whiz, I've done this myself in a number of cases personally, and so on in the past, then inevitably they come down. But without the justification of sitting an exam and it being your own work, then the teacher grading did need to have a heavier weighting, I think, in all of these systems, in the Scottish system, in the IB, and in the A-level system. And I suppose that's perhaps the point I would want to make there. That's a brief summary. Anyway, thank you, Will.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Keziah, I know that you've got something you'd like to say on the cohort size point, so we'll come back to that if that's okay. And just before we do, Leora, perhaps I can come over to you at this point and give your sense of how things look to you sort of across the system.
Thanks, Will. So I'd like to pick up on the point that Stephen ended with. Yesterday, our A-level students completed their schooling in the face of a global pandemic at an extraordinarily difficult moment in human history. And so while many of them received the grades they were hoping for, I think it's fair to acknowledge that some did not. It is good that many universities are approaching the admissions task with significant leniency and flexibility, because they know this year has been such a difficult one. But we need all universities to follow this approach. So it is my sincere wish that all our students reach the destination of their choice, whatever that might be. But there will be some students for whom this is not true. And I know now that all teachers and leaders' efforts are going into securing the destinations of these young people. So I was particularly moved yesterday by a message to Year 13 students from ARC. So I thought I'd share just a short quote from the statement to you. So it starts, first off, you should know that you have done something amazing, something that no other young person has ever been asked to do, to complete your schooling in the face of a global pandemic. This has been an incredibly demanding year, and we are immensely proud of all of you. We know that the news reports over the past weeks about how your grades will be calculated this year have created some confusion and some uncertainty. We want you to know that we are here to support you, and we will do everything we can to help you go on to your university course, your apprenticeship, or the destination you aspire to. That's the quote from ARC. Up and down the country, there will be, I know, similar messages of reassurance, support, and hope as we speak directly to our young people. So I also want to take this opportunity to recognise the work the teachers and leaders in schools, trusts and colleges across the country have done, whose professionalism, integrity and hard work should not go unnoticed and should not be criticised. They too have gone the extra mile in undertaking the challenging exercise of the centre assessment grades and rankings, also in the context of a global pandemic. So we know that following the announcement on Tuesday evening, Ofqual published a statement which confirmed the government wants to provide some additional assurance to students by confirming that evidence from valid mock exams can be considered as part of an appeal. I know colleagues have concerns about this, and we've heard some of those concerns already, and we know Ofqual is working urgently to determine the standards that will be required. What I want to say about this is this policy is directed explicitly at individual unfairness. So I think in the context of the global pandemic, we need to recognise that this policy is directly explicit. It is directed in this way. I'd like to just conclude with a section of a poem by the young poet Harry Baker. This is his poem called Impossible. The truth is, it's too easy to tell ourselves that it's too hard, when facing the end, that it's too late to even make a start. But if we take impossible to mean that we don't have a chance, then we have lost sight of how unlikely it is that we would ever get this far. We cannot know how far our actions go, the impact they might have. Sometimes the only thing that we can do is to do what we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Leora. Youande, I'll come over to you. Again, you're working as an assistant principal, but you're going to speak from a slightly different vantage point today. So what's your take on all of this?
I think that from the beginning of lockdown in March, teachers have gone above and beyond to act as mental health support, educators, and family support to the students that they serve. And the culmination of this academic year and the tumultuous nature of it has made a lot of teachers feel as though their efforts have been massively undermined. I think that the government attempted to create a system in the face of not really knowing what to do, which in actual fact has created a lot of confusion and hysteria for all involved. The teachers that we've been speaking to, particularly from, which has already been mentioned, the popular subjects have been massively affected by this. If you think about the most popular subject, I think it's documented as maths, second hit would be psychology, followed there by biology. And students studying those subjects therefore are being hit unnecessarily. If you go to schools where they have smaller cohorts, they're all being very quiet and feel, much like Davina mentioned, that sense of guilt of celebrating, enjoying the grades that they've been awarded. And in the face of teachers who, and in those particular subjects, who are teaching classes upwards of 17, in some cases 30, what are they to say to their students? I do think that as teachers, we have, in the face of unprecedented, I feel that word should be banned at the end of this school year, by the way, in the face of a lot of challenge, have done the best that they can to support their students. However, I do feel that teachers have been undermined in this situation, and they feel they're not too sure where to go from here. What was the purpose of the robust nature of the calculated assessment grades to then be undermined by this idea of mocks, which Jill rightly said, depending on where you are in the country, depending on what school you're in, is a very different experience for all involved. So to surmise, I think we understand that students have had the worst of it all, but time needs to be taken to think about what this has done to the teachers' credibility in their ability to predict grades and to provide support for their students in the face of uncertainty.
Thank you, Youande. So what we're now going to do is go into the Q&A. So if you're in the audience and you have a question, please do use the Q&A function to submit that. I can see that we've got questions coming through, which is great. There's a question here that talks about small cohort sizes. I think that there's a few different things in this question, but let's focus on the small cohort size, because Keziah, I know that you wanted to come back on what Stephen was saying there. So Keziah, what is your sort of view on how small cohort sizes have affected what we've been seeing?
My difficulty is that we are a small centre. Every single one of my classes is a small class, and obviously we run the sixth form for many very well-intentioned reasons, but it does cost us money because running A-level classes is expensive. All of our cohorts are therefore small. And I understand in the larger sort of, I mean, Jill's obviously got a very large sixth form, Stephen's got a much larger sixth form than we've got, and we've got about 57 year 13s we have 57 year 13s, and the effects on the downgrading and the upgrading, and we've had a couple of children drop into U's that are completely and utterly unacceptable and appalling, has had really, for us, nothing to do with cohort size. I mean, 100% of one edXL course downgraded all the students, and then there are other courses that haven't been affected at all. And it's very odd. We're still waiting, and I don't know if this is the case for other people, we're still waiting for exam results from one of the cash courses, childcare, and we've been told that's not going to come out until the 28th. And all I can imagine is they've made a complete pig's ear of what's been going on, because they were asking only last week for more evidence of things that are not normally assessed as part of the course. So I mean, obviously, you know, when you look at the big picture, cohort sizes may have something to do with it, but for, you know, we're a relatively small sixth form, but we're not untypical. It's just random. It's completely weird. And I'm looking at one of the courses that is always, you know, there's 12 students in our psychology A level. That's been taught by the same teacher for about 10 years. She is a brilliant professional. She is always, her centre assessed grades have always been absolutely bang on for GCSE and A level, and 67% have been downgraded. I don't understand that at all. And actually, when you start doing the analysis, you get angrier and angrier. And it just doesn't make any sense at all. So although cohort sizes, you know, I understand there's an argument about it, I'm not seeing any pattern.
Okay. We have another question here, and Stephen, I'm going to use this as a segue to come to you. And I think it relates nicely to the cohort size question. From your experience, which subjects are the most affected by downgrading? Stephen, you mentioned the IB. Could you tell us a bit more about that and your sense of how this has affected different subjects?
Yeah, I can. I'm not sure the one follows to the other, as it were. In other words, I think the IB process, one of the differences with the IB process was that the IB took what are called the coursework, which are called internal assessments, the IAs, and they looked at the relationship between predicted grades, IAs and final grades, and created a mathematical model based on that. In my view, they absolutely statistically invalidated the model by marking the IAs themselves. And we know that there are real IA marking problems, so they centrally mark the IAs instead of using school assessed IAs. And that actually invalidates the stats. I have explained this to them, they do know, I think, because they're not the same as proper IAs. And that meant that there was almost a random nature. I very much empathize with Keziah's comments there. This very strange sense of things being random. And it's random across subjects. There are no obvious, not too much to be said in terms of subjects. Some schools have, in IB, have said that economics has been severely hit. Others, for us, it was sort of chemistry and biology that seemed to be severely hit. And there was some commonality, but it was commonality of a sort that, you know, these three schools might agree on this, and a little overlap group of 4 schools would agree on that subjects. So individual subjects were very hard to pull out. And indeed, for individual schools, some subjects did better than normal. And I suspect that's true in the A-level outcomes as well, because the statistical modeling will have variability, and the variability is based on the model, not on the pupils themselves. And that's what really is fundamentally wrong here. For us at A-level, we've had one subject which we think has been perhaps downgraded more than it should have been. And as you can tell, we're reasonably happy with our A-level grades, and that's history of art. But apart from that, there is no pattern. I think the important thing, and just sorry, it's like to bang on about this, is about the generosity. I'm really struck by Keziah's comment about U's. I cannot understand how a statistical model could ever generate U's for a pupil, because, you know, I hope we all agree that every pupil we have in our sixth form can achieve a reasonable grade. I mean, I actually think that a C is achievable ultimately by everyone, if you really deal with it in the right way. And therefore, even your most diffident pupil can get an E. and you would never predict below. I mean, I don't think you'd predict below a D. I don't know how many people did predict below Ds. Certainly, you know, we didn't. We did predict some Ds. And so for the Ofqual to award U's, a U is when someone actually mucks it up. It's not when they're not good enough. So U's shouldn't be there at all. So I think there's, I think there's some sort of fundamentals within this modelling that is wrong. And just as, if I can just sort of just hold this for a second more, one of the and it's very early days, these results only came out yesterday, that there is some evidence, certainly through our sector, where because the modelling has been based on prior attainment, that schools, even with smallish year groups, if a school has traditionally always had 1D in a subject and they have a year group where they don't have that candidate this year, then the bottom person will get a D. There was evidence that one school had a bunch of A's and B's and so on, and then 1D because they were the last person on the rank order and there had to be a D in that. So my suspicion is from Keziah School that actually that they're looking to give you the U's that you may have had in the past. Well, that's just unacceptable, because that's to say that those pupils would have had a bad day in the exam. Well, no, that's random. That's not how it works. So, sorry, forgive me, I've slightly gone on there.
No, thank you.
I've answered your question there, because I don't know that any specific subjects. I think it's very varied across the piece on which subjects have been hit particularly hard. I suspect that's random.
Okay. I'm going to follow on with this question because I think it aligns with where we're headed currently. So the Telegraph reported comments from Ofqual where they said that schools put in, and I quote, implausibly high judgments, including one which submitted all A* and A* grades for students in 2 subjects to justify moderation. Do you think it's right for Ofqual to use this as a defence for their new model? Keziah, I'm going to come to you on that. And then Jill, I'll come to you after that.
Very simply, no, it's absurd. It's treating us like idiots. We're professionals. Every single one of us, I don't know any school that didn't go through an incredibly rigorous process to come up with their centre assessed grades. And I'm embarrassed that they've come up with that as a statement. It's shocking.
Okay, thank you, Keziah. Jill?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's factual or whether that came from the this morning interview with Gavin Williamson yesterday. I'm not aware of any school in that situation, and I would have thought that I mean, you know, if you were to look at this process slightly differently, I would have thought that there would have been a system that would be not difficult to put in place, whereby schools could have been a sort of moderation process whereby schools that had entered grades that gave them you know, a ridiculously high progress figure could have been held to account, could have had a visit, could have had some sort of process by which they justified, because it may have been genuine. And then there are some subjects where students may genuinely all be on track for an A or an A* grade. If I could just add about subjects, we did see subject patterns, and I think I've seen something nationally which suggests this might be the case. So psychology, it's been mentioned a few times, and it's a very large cohort subject nationally. Psychology, I think, is an issue, as is English literature, as is biology and chemistry. We have large cohorts in all of those subjects, and looking nationally. And there's also been some debate about whether there is a difference between some of the exam boards, but I'm not sure that I have any evidence of that personally.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Okay, question here, and this is to the heads, so to the school leaders on our panel. Is it possible to elaborate on the questions facing students due to the 42-day appeal process? During our introductory comments, we heard about the fact that actually that's going to take us into next term. So, Stephen, perhaps if I come to you first, then Keziah, then Jill, your thoughts on the appeal process.
Well, I think the issues, and again, if you don't mind, I'll answer across IB and A level. For A level, there is still absolutely no clarity at all on what this appeal process might look like. We were all, I think, against through the consultation, this idea that there would be no appeal process. was heavily criticised by pretty much all school leaders, as far as I can see, because there needs to be a way of appealing some of these grades when things have clearly gone wrong, as they've clearly gone wrong. And the timescale, I mean, I feel to a certain extent for Ofqual in all of this. I mean, this was, dumped on their door, and it is very difficult to see how to undo it, other than by doing a Scotland and just saying, okay, well, we'll give them those grades. And I completely agree that the mock grade idea does seem to be faintly bizarre when we all put in so much effort on the CAGs in the first place, and that was a huge amount of work for everyone. I'm sure everyone would agree with that. So I think the difficulty here is that that over that timescale, university places will be lost. And I think that is seriously problematic for pupils. And even if they then get graded up, there is no way that the university, which will offer that place for the following year, then there will be a whole pile of people who are taking gap years that they haven't planned for and haven't organised. And a gap year is a great thing if it's properly organised. To do it on the hoof is actually potentially quite damaging. So I'm concerned by that. The IB approach has been to create a new review procedure. It seems that has been overwhelmed by reviews, and the IB have allowed us to review at 3 levels: into the individual level, the departmental level, and the whole school level. And the people I've spoken to have all done pretty much all of those things in different proportions. We've certainly put in reviews at each level. And we wait to see, we're still waiting for that. So this is why we've got pupils waiting for university places who've now been rejected on their IB scores, still waiting for that review. And again, that is because the IB are faintly overwhelmed by it. I don't think this is necessarily the moment, Will, if I'd be happy to develop an idea about what I think people should have done, but that's not really that helpful at the moment. And that would be should have done both for A level and for the IB, and I suspect for the GCSEs for next week as well, which I also...
I definitely want to come on to what we should be doing and how maybe next week can be done differently, or how this could have played out differently. Can I throw into the mix an addendum to that question? Has anyone heard of universities telling students that they will not be able to start this autumn if they decide to appeal on the basis of mock exams? So Keziah, can I come to Youande? Go for it.
Yes, so just harping to my experience that, and it seems to be the case of Russell Group. I wouldn't say it's the case for sort of the 1994 universities or even the selective ones, but it's particularly unique to Russell Group and the way that they are being very dismissive of students, particularly students who have had, for example, like a community language, which there was no ability to provide a CAG for if they weren't being taught that in the school, and therefore that'd be hugely detrimental to them. We know from their AS grade that they could have done exceptionally well, but due to no evidence on our part, because it wasn't a taught subject, the student was rejected on that basis. And if they wanted to go to that university, which they have the grades for, just missing that community language one, they've been rejected, let alone if, and that's even with an AS grade as an example. So my feeling is, I think it was Leora who said earlier, all universities need to be a little bit more flexible. And I mean all, and that means Russell Group needs to really think about the way that they've dealt with this situation entirely.
And has anyone heard of universities, saying to students, actually, if you appeal, you can't apply this year? Is that something anyone has picked up?
No, but what's happened with some of our students is that the universities seem to not be clear about the appeals process either, which is not surprising because we're not either. But I've had a student yesterday saying, I need to appeal, in normal circumstances, you can do I forget what it's called, but a rapid appeal, a fast track appeal. And they still seem to be thinking that might be happening. And so it's putting pressure on students, which then puts pressure on the school to suggest that we can appeal right now. And of course, we can't. And also suggesting that if their grade goes up by appeal, they will be allowed in. We have had this from Russell Group universities, but the timescale is too short. So if the appeal takes as long as it's suggested, it's too, and actually that is too late for universities to plan. To be fair, if they have to wait till the start of September, that's too late. And it's not as if papers have to be remarked. So I'm not quite sure why the appeals process needs to take as long as is being suggested.
Okay, thank you. Davina, can I ask you for your take on this? How are you and your peers finding liaising with universities at this time?
Yes, I think majority of people are quite just confused, to be honest. Like no one really understands what's going on. No one really has any clarity on everything, like everyone else was saying. Yeah, like a lot of my friends have really been through it with this whole thing. Like they're really upset, but obviously they can't really do anything about it. And a lot of them are wanting to appeal, but are being told by the school, we don't know how to appeal. So they're just kind of left in this weird area of what do I do? Do I apply for clearing? Do I not? And yeah, it's quite upsetting, especially because I have my place at uni and I don't want to talk to people and come from a place of ignorance, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's like I can't really comfort anyone in that sense and tell them, oh, it's going to be okay, everything we figure out, because I actually don't know what's going to happen. No one knows really like what the whole appeal process will be. And then I'm hearing how apparently if you do appeal for like a higher grade, that will push down other students through the whole ranks system. And I don't know if that's true or not. And it's just, I don't know, it's just a lot of weird things and rumors that are going around that are just making it very uneasy for students who are in that situation. So
yeah, thank you, Davina, for sharing that. So obviously, and rightly, lots of comments on, both from our panel and questions about this, on this downgrading that's taken place. So a question here from Gillian Brady. What are the panel's thoughts on the Scottish solution? In Scotland, only 25% of grades were downgraded, so the impact of applying it in England would be more significant. But would it perhaps be fairer to upgrade pupils to a professional teacher's initial grade than to downgrade to a statistical model? Essentially, do we think downgrading is fair? How else should grades be adjusted? Leora, perhaps first I could come to you with that. Do you feel placed to answer that? Oh, Leora, I think you're muted.
If you don't mind, I'll just respond to Davina's issue about does an appeal, if it's successful for an individual, then impact on other students? Because that was doing the rounds yesterday, particularly on social media, and that's not the case. So I think we all need, young people and teachers and leaders can all be reassured that is not going to happen. If a young person's appeal is successful, then you know that grade will change, but their friends, their classmates' grades will not be affected. So that seems to me an important point. There was quite a lot going around on social media yesterday that was worryingly inaccurate. And I don't think anybody intended that to be. It's just the case that, as others have said, that there's a little bit of uncertainty around now. So in an uncertain situation, you know, people try to second guess what's happening, and then we get misinformation. So in relation to the question, what do I think of what happened in Scotland and should it happen here? I think. I think there's a fairness issue which I'd want to talk about. Obviously, in this extraordinary year, whatever action is taken, whatever decision or solution is put forward, sort of by definition, there's going to be some level of unfairness, because the fairest way to assess young people is through an examination, and young people haven't had the chance to sit an examination. But if you look at what's happened in Scotland, you've got young people whose schools have done you know, quite a rigorous job in developing the centre assessment grade, and then you've got other schools that have been more generous. Now, I want to use that word generous really carefully, because I think we would never want a system in which teachers don't believe the best of their young people. And Sam Friedman did a really interesting Twitter thread yesterday where he said, let's say there are 5 students capable of getting an A. As a teacher, I strongly believe that all of these 5 students are capable of getting an A, and probably actually they are. But in any exam year, for the reasons that Stephen said, maybe 2 of them would have a bad day, and they wouldn't get an A, so they'd get a B. But 3 of them would have got an A. As a teacher, it's really impossible to say which 3 would get the A and which 2 wouldn't. So you have to then, in the interest of fairness, say, I believe all 5 of these are capable of getting an A. The effect of that on the system is that it pushes grades up. And that's really hard, because then there's an issue of fairness about the students who took their exams last year and the students who are going to take their exams next year. So you see the problem that we've got in the system. It's impossible to be accurate, 100% accurate, for our young people this year, because we cannot know without an exam which 3 would have got the A and which 2 wouldn't. So my worry with the Scottish system is that we've got now that inflation in the system, and that's not fair either. And it's particularly not fair to those Scottish young people who sat their exams last year and those Scottish young people who sit their exams next year. So we're in a difficult position. And I as much as I take everybody's points about the mock and the difficulty with the mock, because not all mocks are sat in the same way, they're not marked in the same way, they're used for different purposes in schools. I understand all of that. But I think if we understand that particular policy is a policy that is attempting to address this issue of unfairness at the level of the individual, then I think there's something that we can do here, something that we can do to support those young people, where we think the statistical model has treated them unfairly. There is now a way, may not be a perfect way, but there is now a way of helping them to get those grades. And then my last point would be, and we still need universities to show leniency and to hold places that have been offered until we've sorted out those appeals. So we all need to work together now to ensure that our young people who have suffered through this pandemic get the best possible outcome and get into the destinations of their choice, while not unfairly disadvantaging last year's students or next year's students at the same time.
Thank you, Leora. I suppose the desperate thing about this situation is, and as you've been illustrating, it's almost what's the least bad solution here, not what is the solution that's going to make everyone happy.
Absolutely.
So we've got lots of questions that relate to what next. So I'm going to try and sort of pick out the key themes among those, and we can deal with each of them in turn. Mm-hmm. So sort of in the immediate short term, next week, we've got GCSE results. So I'm going to sort of throw 2 questions to the panel on this. Firstly, what are you expecting to happen next week? What are we expecting to see? In terms of grade distribution and how that will look. And I know that that's navel gazing to an extent, but based on this week, what would your predictions be? And the second is, what will you be doing in your school? And I think really importantly, is there anything that you'll be doing differently in your school, given your experience this week, when you get those results and when students are getting those results? For the sort of overview, Youande, perhaps I can come to you first in terms of what you're expecting to see next week with GCSE grades, and then the school leaders, I will come to you then.
Thank you. So what we're sensing from a mindful equity perspective in the teachers that we're speaking with is they feel uncertain, and they feel it's going to be as unsettling as this week has been and as positive as this week has been. I do think, though, that we have a little bit more power when it comes to how we can continue to support the students after those results are released, because sixth forms are a lot more forgiving than universities ever have been and potentially ever will be. I think particularly in schools, what we're hearing at the moment is that a lot of senior leaders are considering and planning ahead, how are we going to equip our GCSE students with the tools they need to approach and tackle level 3 qualifications, whatever results they get. There are some schools that are reporting that actually they're going to do what some universities did and lower down, and that's flicking all of their offers from conditional to unconditional, but with strong and robust plans in place to support the students to access level 3 qualifications. And I think it just goes back to actually what teachers are best at. They see a situation, they see a problem, and they think about that solution positively and how they can best address it. And so teachers will do what they've always done and support those students with whatever results they're given, build up their confidence, and ensure that they get the best grades they can do through those level 3 qualifications that they embark upon.
Thank you. Keziah, can I come to you? How's this going to play out in your school next week?
I'm very worried. I'm desperately worried. And the journey that we've been on over the last couple of years is perhaps greater at GCSE level, where the school has underperformed for many, many years. And this was the year. I can't tell you how hard those kids worked, how hard the staff worked. And I feel it's just going to be, well, your historical outcomes have been poor. You are going to be just absolutely slashed. And that's how I feel our community is going to be treated next week. We saw this A-level debacle coming. The profession saw it coming. We knew it was going to happen. You know, that Wednesday night, we kind of hoped maybe we're all wrong. And we weren't wrong. In fact, it was worse than we thought it was going to be. So everything that I'm anticipating, you know, they've got a week to sort it out. I don't think they will. I don't think many people care about the kids that go to my school, apart from my staff and the parents and the community. And we will look after all of our children because that's what we do. But I feel absolutely, I feel exhausted. I'm done in. And it's beyond unfair. These kids have got apprenticeships lined up. They've got college courses lined up. They're not going to get onto them. And other kids at other schools that have got historically better results, but actually we're going to get lower grades than them, will take their places instead. And that's the reality. I'm very angry.
Okay, Keziah, thank you for sharing. Jill, how about your school?
Yeah, very much the same. And we're obviously looking at what we're going to do in terms of enrolling students into our own sixth form. We also recruit students from other local schools as well into our sixth form. So how do we do that? What do we do in terms of the grades? We're going to look at as well how the process that we give students their centre assessed grades. So we've been giving students their centre assessed grades yesterday on request, but we may be doing that in advance next week because we know that they've been wanted to be used for the process of applying for sixth forms. And actually, even some universities ask to see centre assessed grades, even though that's not part of the appeals process. So that might be something that we'll tweak, but absolutely, like Keziah, I'm not anticipating anything good at all. And I would just like to come back. I would like to come back on something to do with this notion of grade inflation. And if we went to the centre assessed grades, we'd have grade inflation. And I think I also agree we should get rid of some of the words around the global pandemic and all of those things and anomalous years. But this is a global pandemic. We are in an anomalous year. I don't think if we allowed the centre assessed grades to go through, that is a mark of grade inflation. These are not a typical and ordinary and a normal set of results. And so there is an alternative way of looking at that and recognising that these results can never be and will never be able to be compared to previous results and subsequent results. Where I do have concerns is the subsequent years, the current year 12s going into year 13 and 10s going into 11s, and how their grades will be arrived at. Particularly, I think we've got a real issue around trust to do with some of the things that are coming out now about the likelihood of older children, secondary school children and sixth form students being able to transmit coronavirus. So I think there's a whole lot of things going forward. This is not in the least bit over. It's not over for our current year 13 and 11 cohorts, and it's absolutely not over for our new year 12, year 13s and year 11s starting in September. And so I think we should definitely not just accept things as they are. And we should definitely, and then as students and teachers and everybody that feels that this is currently unjust, we should still be trying to communicate and make our voices heard so that we can get things will never be the same as they would have been had the exams been sat. But actually, therefore, we should be erring, if anything, we've used the word generous, we should be erring on the side of generosity.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. Davina, I have a question for you prompted by Jill raising the issue of trust there. What's your sense of how students feel in terms of trust towards their teachers, towards the education system right now? Where has this left the relationship between schools and their students, would you say?
It's kind of hard to say. I think, speaking from my point of view, I do trust my teachers because I've always had a good relationship with my teachers. And you can't really say the same for some people, obviously. And a lot of students were feeling as though some teachers kind of had it out for them. Maybe they wouldn't like give them the grades that they deserved, but obviously that's not the case. No teacher would ever do that. But yeah, I think a lot of students are very angry, especially angry at the whole government, angry at the situation, and just feel like they've completely lost trust in the system at all, and as if the system's just rigged against them. And especially because I live in Lewisham, so it's a lot of like low socioeconomic backgrounds, and people feel as though this is bordering like classism in a sense, you know, just keeping everyone under. And yeah, I think students are just very angry and just completely just not trusting anything that the government or Ofqual have said.
Okay, thanks, Davina.
Okay.
So slightly looking ahead to, the next academic year and dealing with the fallout from this, a question about the autumn series, about resits, about retaking these exams. Stephen, how's that looking from your point of view? How do you think you will manage that process in a way that is not going to...
Well, my first comment about this is I'm not calling these resits. I'm rather ridiculously calling them sits, because I think there's a psychological problem with the autumn series for the pupils. They were told that they were not taking their exams some while ago. They have never been through the process. It's a real problem for them even going to university. They've never been through the process of the, let's focus on the A level here, of the final SWOT and really getting on top of those, and the cramming of the exam papers, which is we've all been through it, and it's an extraordinarily rigorous process. And to sit exams without having done that is one problem, and the other problem is that nothing quite substitutes for the pressure of sitting in an exam. And when I talk about people having a bad day, this is from first-hand experience as well. It's very easy to have a bad day. And when you've gone through your exam series and you've had, a couple of bad days and you feel you need a resit, and you take your resits either a year later, it's pretty common for someone to get 3 Ds at A level and then resit them a year later and get 3 As or, 2 A stars and an A. But it wasn't that they were 3D candidates, it's because, life works like that. So actually, I have real trepidation about the program of sits, as it were, because I think that the pupils will have seen resits in the past and they see how successful they are, but they are not the same pupils. They've not been through the same rigorous final swatting, the pressure of going through the exams, the joy of finishing them, all of that stuff hasn't happened. So I am quite concerned by them. Half of me is saying to people that haven't got university places, is thinking of saying, actually, you might be better off waiting till next summer and going off and doing this differently. And I think that's got to be done on a case-by-case basis. So I've got, there'll be pupils that might want to resit to take those autumn series at A level, and they might be worth doing in 1 or 2 cases. And I think it will be very, very small numbers here. But actually, if someone's got a much more serious problem, I think they're going to be better off leaving it a year and actually using that gap year. Okay, well, they can't go traveling or doing whatever it is that they want to do in their gap year. They might need to sort out their future more successfully. And that is an option. And, you know, at the bottom of all of this, there is that repechage, that way of getting back into the system, of taking a year for some at least. That's not easy for everyone, I know, because some of the areas that some of my colleagues here work in, actually that's not an easy option. It's an easier option for some of my pupils, not all of them. For GCSEs, oddly enough, I think there is an opportunity for those who need to get a decent maths grade or a decent English grade, you know, those essentials. Actually, the October-November series might be a good option for them. And I think that will look very different from the A-level ones. But I have real cautions about the October-November series for pupils sitting them. That's where I sit with that one. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Keziah, I'll come to you. I could see you at points nodding and at points shaking your head. What?
That might just be random. Apologies for that. I think when for my school, for where we are, and the history where it's come from, for some of the courses, they weren't completed by March. We sent A-level students and obviously GCSE students off with some of the content not taught, not covered, and now they're going to be resitting an exam in a month or so, a couple of months. First of all, without any teacher input to support their revision, but also many elements of the course not even taught. And if they're trying to teach themselves at home, bless them, well, maybe they're also working a job or starting an apprenticeship. That isn't going to happen. It's just not a workable solution. They're not changing the number of papers, they're not changing the content. You can't really do that anyway because schools teach content in different orders and they cover things in different sort of ways. But I really don't see the resits this autumn as any kind of a solution. Apologies for that, I will just kill it. Seriously, no one ever phones the landline anymore, do they? And it's dying. It won't go. Why is it doing that? I do apologise. I'm just going to throw it over there. That hasn't worked either, has it? It will go at some point. But what we're offering for some students that have been completely badly affected by this is the opportunity to rejoin year 13 if they need to, and retake the entire year, which isn't a perfect solution because obviously some of them did the first part of it absolutely brilliantly, but otherwise we can't offer them any kind of support with the exams. Apologies for the interruption there. I don't know why the phone's gone either.
No, that's no problem at all. Leora, I know you're keen to come in on this as well,
yeah,
with regards to the autumn series.
So my preference would be that we sort out every young person's destination now, and that we don't have to rely on the autumn series at all for some of the reasons that Keziah has said. So I don't think that is beyond our collective wit actually to sort this out. For all of our young people and to get them to the right destination, and to do that, you know, before universities close down their offers. And so I sort of feel like the autumn series is a bit of a distraction because I think that's where our energies need to be.
Leora, it's a bit of an unfair question potentially to ask you, but I mean, how would you begin to do that given how messy the situation is at present?
I mean, we've yet to see what the data is on how many young people have actually got a place in, you know, whatever their destination is, but particularly in universities. But we did see quite a lot of movement on that yesterday. I think we will see more movement on that today. Hopefully, as more universities understand that they need to offer flexibility and show some leniency here. So, you know, by the end of today, we should have a better sense of who are the students who are left, who haven't now got into the destination of their choice, and then we do as much as we can to correct that, including the use of the appeal system where we can. So part of the reason why it's really important that universities are flexible and lenient is that we don't want to overwhelm the appeal system, because that will then create a problem for getting all of the appeals addressed in the timescales that we need to get them addressed. So I think as much as possible, we, yesterday and today, we get young people where they need to be. We review which young people are now in an unfortunate situation, not where they need to be, and then we focus on getting those young people into the right places as quickly as we can.
Thanks, Leora. Youande, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on this, and particularly given the schools that you're speaking to, and I suppose thinking about the young people at risk of marginalisation in any case, and how they come out of all of this process. What's your sort of take on the autumn series and what Leora is saying about, actually, does that feel like a bit of a distraction from the bigger question here about how we get students to where they need to be? How does that land with you?
I just couldn't agree more with the fact that the autumn series is a distraction. I think it's not where our energies need to be. I think a lot of the schools, particularly in low socioeconomic backgrounds, the students really have lost faith in education. And so even the ones who did get placed, whether it be from an unconditional offer or from achieving decent results, they no longer feel confident in education or even in their own abilities. And a number of them, a large proportion of them, have deferred their places. Now that's an example of students who've got places. Now the ones who don't, they're very aware that they've not had robust academic intervention. It's not to say that teachers haven't been working exceptionally hard during lockdown to teach them remotely, but there's no replacement for being in that classroom, none whatsoever. And I think if there was any suggestion that AI could come along and replace teachers, I think lockdown's definitely dispelled those myths. And so I completely agree that we need to think about how we can support these young people into appropriate destinations for them. I think the situation in London is very different from what's going on across the country. Actually, I think apprenticeships have been very difficult to find in a city. And that's not to say that there aren't challenges outside of London either. And so there needs to be a lot more support in, let's get the economy moving, let's get students into work if that's what they want to do, they want to go into apprenticeships, and more importantly, if they do want to go to university, what's stopping universities from being a little bit more flexible and actually planning how they can support these young people through the courses from their starting point.
Thank you, Youande, for that. I mean, we've got a few different points here, I think, raising the issue of communication, and I can see some questions in the thread about this as well. Davina has talked from her experience about how sort of confusing and unsettling all of this has been. Jill, what's your sense of how DFE here has communicated with schools about this?
If I was to be truly blunt, I think initially the process around devising the centre assessed grades, it was a difficult situation. I recognise all of that. I think where things began to become really challenging in terms of trust was when we started to hear how many grades were going to be downgraded, when we began to realise how much of a statistical model this would be and how little the teacher ranking, etc., would be taken into account. And then when we heard at the sort of the 11th, 12th hour about the idea of the mock exam grades, it really did sound as if that was an idea generated late at night over a bottle of wine by somebody who didn't really know what mock exams were all about. And that provided additional confusion. So as Davina said, when we were being asked, so as you'd expect, lots of students asked them, I want to appeal this grade. Students were understanding and families were understanding that they can't make the appeal, that schools can make the appeal. We'd sent out letters and linked to a guidance, etc., to students and families. But where we were stuck was where students wanted to make appeals, and we agree we want to make an appeal, but at the moment we don't actually have the criteria. And so to have that communication not with us, ready for yesterday, was dreadful, actually. And I just wanted to add one thing about, I think I agree with Stephen that it's probably much more useful if a student really wants to improve their outcomes. And this happens every year, where you have students saying to you, can I resit year 13? I mucked up. And it's a considered decision. But I wanted to flag up that actually there's a funding implication there for sixth forms and schools. We are penalised when students repeat years and repeat courses. We're not funded in the same way, and that funding impact then ricochets on for another couple of years with the way that the funding works. So I think the other thing we need to ask about is whether the government is going to look in any way at altering the way that students who resit years are funded. And it may also be the case that our current year 12s, because of how lockdown has been for them, that they may also be asking in greater numbers to actually start sixth form again and to restart year 12. And I know that they are. So that's another area that I think we need to be asking the department about. I think there's a lack of trust with regards to the department now.
Thank you.
Than there was before.
Keziah, I want to ask for your take on this as well. I mean, you've spoken very passionately and very candidly about your experience of this as a head and your young people and community's experience of this episode. How has DFE communicated with you? How's Ofqual communicated with schools about all of this, in your view?
Not great. It's been limited. Everything's been changed at the last minute. There was that wonderful week where the guidance changed about 42 times, and I couldn't really keep up. I now look at the principles and I think about what serves the school and the community best. I have to be very selective what I share with my staff, my students and my community, because otherwise they're getting an update 2 or 3 times a day. No one can run a school that way. It's quite poor. The fact that the results were downloaded on Wednesday, and we still don't know what the appeals process is, how long it's going to take, what's going to happen. I think that's quite poor. I am surprised. I'm not always a great fan of the institutions that I serve, but I do expect them to be competent, and sometimes if ministers and what have you are not specialists in education, they do have civil servants that can do an awful lot of their work. It just hasn't been well run and well communicated. That's not just here, because obviously we had what happened in Scotland as well. I'm sure the intention is very, very good, and I'm sure the last minute ditch to include mock results was well intentioned, but there's no clarity, and we're still waiting for the clarity. And while that's in place, the rumours will start, people will lose hope, people will give up. We'll have sixth formers that just decide that, what's the point? I'm not going to bother, I don't want to go to university, I'll just find something else to do instead. And it will negatively impact this generation, and actually in areas of high socioeconomic deprivation, the impact will be greater, because parents are simply unable to support their children because they've been furloughed, they've been made redundant as well. It's very, very difficult. Whatever the difficulties are in your average community, you magnify it in a community like my own. It is a wonderful community, and they come together and they support one another, but there is not a lot of trust in education through the generations because they feel let down by it. You start to win the battle, and this year happens, and it's going to permeate again for years and years and years. If we're trying to talk year 11s next week into joining sixth forms to do A levels and to do BTECs and vocational qualifications, it's going to be a hard sell for some of them, because what's the point? But we'll do our best. Yeah, because that's what we do as a profession.
I'm conscious of time. We want to finish latest 11:30. So I'm going to ask one final question, which is to all of our panel. And if I can ask you to answer in one sentence. And that question is, given how upsetting and distressing a lot of this year has been, can you think of one thing that you're optimistic about for the next academic year? And that can be in relation to exams specifically, if something strikes you, or it can be in relation to education and schooling more broadly. Davina, I might start with you. Really sort of tee that up for you, given your good results yesterday, Davina, and the fact that you're in a position of feeling more optimistic. What's the thing that's standing out for you?
I guess just starting my degree and just starting uni and just really getting into the world now and just really, yeah, I think I'm just looking forward to uni most of all.
Great, fantastic.
Thank you.
Jill, how about you?
100% getting back into school with all of the students. So we've been in school like everybody else with small numbers of students. It's been fabulous when we had our year 12s and 10s in June, July. That's what I do my job for. Working remotely is in no way a replacement for that. We've learned loads technologically, but back in school, students and staff.
Thank you. Youande, how about you? One thing to be optimistic about.
September 2nd, I echo Jill's sentiments. All teachers, that's what we're built for. We want to be in the classroom, in the building, with the students that we serve, just getting back to work, really.
Thank you. Stephen?
Well, given that there's an awful lot of uphill still to go, and I completely agree with that, I think rather uninspiredly, I completely agree with Jill and Youande. The pupils, we had 3 days where pupils came back at the end of last term, and the smiles on their faces and the smiles on the faces of the teachers was so, I mean, it was, and on mine, I sort of wandered around chatting to people as you do, and it was utterly brilliant. And the fact that they're all going to be, fingers crossed, all turning up at the beginning of September is hugely to be looked forward to. And that's just getting back to the, the teaching staff, all the support staff. Obviously, we have a huge number of support staff here as a boarding school. And that whole community of about 1,000 of us back here will be just wonderful, actually. So yeah, I'm sorry to be less inspired than that, but it really is. Jill got there first. Well done, Jill.
Leora, how about you?
So alongside the joy of education, I'd like to focus on the power of education. And if it's okay, I'd like to quote Nelson Mandela, because as you can probably hear from my accent, I was born in South Africa. Education is the most powerful weapon that we can use to change the world. Let's do that.
Thank you, Leora. Keziah, over to you.
I would agree with everything everybody has said, and I am going to be optimistic. This will be the year that all education join together, and those that run the government will just say, okay, what are your ideas? And will listen to us.
Thank you, Keziah. My colleague Alex has been given the unenviable task of summarising today's discussion, not only on the spot, but in about 90 seconds. So Alex, over to you for your take on sort of what immediately stood out to you as the key themes from today's discussion.
Thanks so much, Will, and thanks to all the panelists. It's been really fascinating and lovely to hear your perspectives, and I'm glad that we've got some positives to look forward to. Overall, I think it's clear that the mood has been low, even where successes have been made. Everybody's aware of the impact on other people, and even young people and teachers who haven't suffered so much are struggling to celebrate because they know how tough it's been for their peers. Small cohorts have been affected very differently, which means different schools and different subjects have seen very different outcomes. Subjects like maths, psychology, biology have been really badly impacted. We've seen some young people being downgraded to U's in their subjects, which is a huge blow and feels to a lot of people as just completely unacceptable. I think it's clear that people have really missed out on the face-to-face contact, but it's great to see that schools have been making the best to support and comfort their students, and that everyone is so solutions focused. And as ever, schools and teachers are really working to support the mental health of staff and students, and make it clear that this is a systemic failing in places rather than a personal one for young people. Teachers have felt undermined and underappreciated. They put a lot of work into things like the centre assessed grades, and it's just not been respected in the way it could have been. In particular, the IB has seen a lot of challenges and significant downgrading, which is continues to be fought by schools that teach it. Young people are feeling angry, disappointed, frustrated, and confusion reigns about what's going to happen going forward in terms of both the idea of valid mocks and the appeals process. There's a bit of a worry that young people are going to lose their places at HE while the appeals process rolls on. It's a long wait, and some may end up with unwanted gap years and no plans. Universities are also struggling to understand how the process is going to work. We need to keep an eye on misinformation on social media. While questions remain unanswered, people are throwing around a lot of ideas, and we need to make sure that we're making efforts to fact check everything that we see and hear so that people are getting the correct information they need. There's some concerns that the Scottish solution has caused inflation in the system, which is unfair and could impact on exams next year, which is creating a bit of a sense of fear and anxiety, and that is felt about what's going to happen next week too. However, in terms of GCSE, sixth forms are a lot more forgiving than universities can be, which means that some have turned conditional offers to unconditional. Hopefully we'll be seeing a lot of young people moving on to the next stage after GCSEs. But generally we want to be erring on the side of generosity as much as possible. The general feeling seems to be that the autumn series is a distraction, and we want to focus on sorting out young people's destinations right now so that we can rebuild their confidence in the system. Communication is vital right now. DfE needs to step up to rebuild trust and make sure that guidance can be more consistent and clear. It's changed repeatedly and been given last minute over the last few months, which has made things really, really tough for teachers. They're having to be very selective about what they share, and it's very difficult to determine what's accurate. Students repeating years of education due to problems with the exams is going to affect schools financially. So this is a point that the DfE should be aware of and consider how they're going to support schools. And overall, I think what everyone is feeling that the impact of what has happened this year is going to permeate for quite a while forward, going forward some years. But we've got positives to look forward to. It's great to hear that Davina, and I'm sure other students as well, are excited about their degrees and getting out into the world and making those changes. And we're really proud of you, Davina, and your peers too, because it's been such a tough time, and it's great to see those achievements. And it's really wonderful to hear that teachers and school leaders are still really passionate about getting back into the classroom to support their young people and their staff, and are longing to have that community back together, because I think it really keeps us going when times are tough. And I wish you all the best in having those start in September and catching up with everyone. And I hope that we can all pull together to continue moving things forward in a positive way.
Thank you very much, Alex. All that remains for me to do is just say an enormous thank you to all of our panelists. It's been a real privilege and pleasure listening to your insight and your experiences. And we are extremely grateful to you for your time and input this morning. This session is going to be put up on YouTube, and we will share that when that is available. And finally, Davina, congratulations once again, and good luck next year as you start university. It was a pleasure meeting you all this morning. Thank you.